Every time our teens open an app, they're stepping into an environment designed to keep them hooked. It's not about weak willpower. It's about how their brains are wired. So every scroll, like, or notification, it triggers a hit of dopamine, which is the brain's reward chemical. And the feeds that they're exposed to on social media, whether that's TikTok or Instagram or whatever it might be, are built on something that's called variable rewards. You might get something exciting one time, and then next time you might not. It's the same principle that drives, high usage of slot machines and things like that. So an unpredictable payoff equals a stronger compulsion. So all of our brains are literally being trained to just keep checking, not because we're weak, but because our system rewards it. Welcome to Parents and Teens Rising, the podcast that bridges the gap between parents and teens and helps families thrive. I'm Jasmine Chandler, teen and parent coach, wilderness rites of passage guide, and founder of Guided Passages. After over 16 years of working with young people, I know how challenging and rewarding these years can be. Each week, we'll explore real conversations, practical tools, and fresh perspectives to help you connect with your teen, support their confidence, and navigate the ups and downs. Let's rise together. Hey everyone, welcome back into the podcast, Parents and Teens Rising. Today I'm talking about something that affects all of us as parents, which is screen time use with our teenagers and with ourselves. Screens and technology have become so pervasive in our everyday lives, sometimes that we are picking them up hundreds of times per day, spending hours and hours of our lives on these things. And what we're finding out more and more as the research keeps coming out is that it has detrimental impacts on our mental health and on the mental health of our kids. And so I just want to open up this conversation today and really talk to you about it because it's something that we're all going through. And before we even dive in, I want to just be really honest about the fact that I do not have this one all figured out at all. So if you've ever felt like you've completely failed at helping your teen find a healthy balance with their phone, I am absolutely right there with you. There have been so many times I've looked at my kids scrolling endlessly, knowing it's not good for them, knowing I should set firmer limits and yet not doing it, or trying and then giving up because the fight just wasn't worth it that day. So we don't have perfect boundaries around phone use in our house at all, not even close. I have fallen short here big time, and I have learned some things the hard way, and I'm learning more and more every day about what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of it I've learned way later than I wish I had. So hopefully this conversation can just open the door again for us to think about this in new ways and to have more understanding about what's going on with our teens and phone use and also with ourselves. So today isn't about me pretending to be an expert who's cracked the code on teenage screen time. It's really about having a real non-judgmental conversation about what's happening for our teens, to our teens, and honestly to all of us. And when it comes to social media, phone use, and attention, because we're all just figuring this out together here. So let's start today by just naming it. The pull of our phones is real. These devices are designed to capture our attention. And if we as adults struggle to put them down with our fully developed brains, imagine what it's like for our teens whose impulse control and reward systems are still under construction. Sometimes I catch myself picking up my phone for just a second, and 15 minutes later, I've forgotten what I even picked up my phone for. So when I see my teen doing the same thing, I can't really stand there on a moral high ground. And that's been humbling for me, realizing that I can't demand something from them that I am not practicing myself. So before we even talk about what to do for our kids, I think it's really worth asking, what's our own relationship with our phones? How often are we using them to check out, to avoid discomfort, to get a little dopamine hit from that scroll? When we start seeing the ways we struggle too, it softens the way we approach our teens and helps us build healthier screen time boundaries for our teens and for ourselves. So let's zoom out for a second and look at what's happening inside the teenage brain when it comes to social media, because teen screen time and mental health are deeply connected. Every time our teens open an app, they're stepping into an environment designed to keep them hooked. And it's not about weak willpower. It's about how their brains are wired. So here are the big things to understand. So the first part of what's going on in their brain is dopamine and variable rewards. So every scroll, like, or notification, it triggers a hit of dopamine, which is the brain's reward chemical. And the feeds that they're exposed to on social media, whether that's TikTok or Instagram or whatever it might be, are built on something that's called variable rewards. So you might get something exciting one time, and then next time you might not. It's the same principle that drives, high usage of slot machines and things like that. So an unpredictable payoff equals a stronger compulsion. So teens' brains are literally being trained to just keep checking. And it's not because they're weak, but because the system rewards it. And research links variable reward design with compulsive online behavior and attention dysregulation. It's basically like their brain's reward lever is being pulled again and again, just enough to keep them curious but not satisfied. And so it just creates this constant loop that needs to be fed, right? And everything else around seems a little bit less exciting than these big, huge bursts of dopamine that you're going to get through this scroll activity. And we have limited amounts of dopamine every day. And so when we start our day off on our phone, it's like everything else after that feels a little bit less exciting and a little bit less rewarding. And so we want to be really aware of the impacts of this type of dopamine on our brain, because it makes the everyday things that we do, whether that's, taking a run that might feel energizing, or doing some art, or playing some music, or having a really great conversation, all those things start to pale in comparison to these easy hits of dopamine. The other thing that's really impacting how our teenagers are in relationship to screen time and their phones is that, their brains are under construction. A lot of pruning is happening, so unused pathways are being discarded, and then new pathways are being strengthened. Their prefrontal cortex is still developing and growing in strength, and so a lot of the things like impulse control, or thinking about consequences, or even thinking about the big picture or the bigger context or what they really want, can be harder to access in moments. And so all of that plays into this scenario of having it be a bigger pull than it even is for us. And we know how big of a pull it is, right? I don't think any of us can really argue the fact that our phones pull us back to them all the time. I really like the way that Dr. Daniel Siegel talks about what's happening in the teen brain in his book, Brainstorm. He actually has an acronym that he created that's called ESSENCE, and he calls it the essence of adolescence. And it stands for emotional spark, which means that, their feelings are stronger. So they have, bigger emotions about everything. Everything feels a little bit more amplified. It's also a very important time of social engagement. So belonging matters so much in the teenage years. And then novelty seeking is something that is such a huge component of the teenage brain. So seeking new and exciting experiences, and they're really drawn to stimulation and risk. And then there's creative exploration, which means they're really open to new possibilities and creativity and using their minds in really unique ways. And these are all really beautiful traits. So passion, curiosity, creativity. But they also make teens extra sensitive to high stimulation and socially charged environments like TikTok and Snapchat and all of those things. So basically what's going on is that their emotional circuits are firing faster than their logic circuits can regulate. And this means that any type of online approval or disapproval is going to land so much harder and be so much more impactful for them as well. So now that we've talked about what's going on in their brains, let's talk about how this actually plays out in day-to-day life. So this is all the stuff that we see and feel and, probably argue about in a lot of our homes. So I'd like to talk about 5 of the main areas where I'm seeing social media and constant phone use impacting teens' mental health and well-being. And honestly, most of us parents are impacted in these same ways. And so all these conversations are not just isolated to our teenagers. We can take all of this and really put the mirror back on ourselves, because this is something that we can all address and we all need to address. And if we're not addressing this in our own selves, and we're not making adjustments in our own lives and our own relationship to technology, then I would propose that it's really not fair or realistic to ask our teens to do something that we are not ourselves willing to do or willing to look at. So let's walk through each one of these, and then we'll talk about what's going on underneath and what the research says and different things that we can try at home. And again, I'm practicing all of this with you. I don't have the answers. We're just exploring here together. So one of the first and biggest impacts is comparison, right? This one is so huge, especially when it comes to how social media affects teens' confidence. So as we all know, any social media feed that we look at is going to include all kinds of highlight reels. Everything's filtered and curated and edited, right? And even though our teenagers know it's filtered, their brain still registers it as real. And research shows us that heavy social media use correlates with lower self-esteem and more body dissatisfaction, especially among girls, but increasingly with boys too. And so teens really start to internalize this idea of like, I'm behind or I'm not enough. And what this might end up looking like, and you might notice, is a lot of mirror checking, a lot of changing outfits, a lot of bailing out on plans because, there just might be this underlying feeling that everyone else looks better or everyone else knows how to do it better than I do. But basically, it just, creates this dynamic of constantly comparing ourselves to others and always feeling a little bit like we're not measuring up and like we don't have anything of value to offer and that nobody will like what we have because it's not as good as someone else. It's this very, very unrealistic expectation, that we are trying to live into, that our teenagers are trying to live into when they are just, trying to create their own life based off of all of these pretend images that they're seeing every day. So one of the ways that we can talk about this with our teenagers is instead of, blaming or shaming them for scrolling for hours and hours and hours and then changing their outfits and then looking in the mirror all the time, we can really bring it again back to ourselves. So we can even say something like, hey, I notice social media sometimes makes me feel like I'm not doing enough or that I'm not pretty enough or I'm not good enough. Do you ever feel that way too after you scroll? And so just reminding them that you're also experiencing this and that kind of normalizes the feeling so they don't feel like, hey, I'm the only one that feels inadequate here. And another thing you can do together or, can even suggest to them is that once a month, really doing a feed audit, going through and unfollowing accounts that make you feel bad about yourself, that every time you see them, you have a big dip in your self-esteem or your self-confidence, or you don't want to go out, like starting to unfollow accounts that make you feel bad and purposely follow ones that are inspiring and offering you, things like joy and excitement and adventure or things that are going to expand yourself and help you to grow instead of just feel bad about yourself. And again, we can model this by saying, hey, let's just go through our feeds together. I'm going to do it with mine too. This account, whenever I look at it, it makes me feel bad about my body. This account, whenever I look at it, makes me feel bad about, the way that I move through the world or the way that I talk or the things that I wear or whatever it might be. And then you can invite them to do the same. So basically, we're focusing on building conscious consumption over controlling. Like, you can't do this, you can't do that. Anytime we go in with strict boundaries and really try to control what they're doing, what we know from research is that they're going to push against it. And more often than not, even if they say that they're going to do something and they pretend that they're doing something on your behalf, they will turn around behind your back and do the opposite. They might have, a burner account or, something that you can't see where they're posting things differently or looking at things differently. So the more we can have conversations about it and collaborate about it and just humanize it, that this is something that we're all going through together. This isn't just you. And let's figure this out together. All right, so the next one I want to talk about is so huge, and I see this one impacting so many of the teens I work with. I see it impacting my own teenagers, and this is lack of sleep. All right, it's one of the biggest factors in mental health and well-being and stress and anxiety and all of that stuff. If we don't have sleep as a foundation for our waking hours, then we are just not setting ourselves up for success in any way. And so we know again from research that screen time use impacts sleep, right? So blue light from our phones delays the release of melatonin, which makes it harder to fall asleep, and then you get less deep rest. Also, if their phone is in their room at night with them, they're going to be much more likely to be scrolling late into the night or to hear a ping and pick it up in the middle of the night or have these text threads that just keep going and going and not be able to wind down, not be able to turn their brain off. Maybe they might even see something that really triggered them, that really hurt their feelings or something right before they went to bed, and then they're spinning in this thing. So it's creating a lot of emotional stimulation. So scrolling, texting, fear of missing out, and all of that just keeps their brains wired even after they turn out the lights. And I've heard parents describe this to me as their teens being so tired, but so wired. So it's really this endless loop where they're tired, and so they scroll, and then they don't get good sleep, and then they have a hard time waking up, and then they're more tired, and then they don't have energy to do anything else. So then they scroll some more, and it's just this constant repeat of negativity, really, because they're not able to put energy into the things that they care about, and they just don't have energy for any of it, for school, for homework, for their sports, for their relationships, and all of that. And so late night screen time use is going to lead to more fatigue, irritability, and lower moods. All right. And so it does have this cascade of negative effects. So this one for sure is one that I do not have down. Somewhere along the line, I let my teenagers bring their phones into their room at night, and walking it back after you've already opened the door is really, really hard. And so that is one of my regrets, is that I didn't set that up at the very beginning when they got their phones, that is an absolute no, that we do not bring our phones in our rooms at night. And then really sticking to that throughout the whole time, because I somehow let that door open, and then walking it back and changing the rules it's just created lots of friction and lots of, fights in my home. And so my biggest recommendation, if you have not given your preteen or teenager a phone yet, start there. Start with that rule right up front, that they do not bring their phones in their bedrooms at night. They plug it in downstairs, they plug it in your room or something like that. And if you're late, like many of us, it's about co-creating change, not enforcing it. So I really love the research that comes from Dr. David Yeager. He wrote a book called 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People. And he talks about this idea of, anytime you're trying to get a young person to do something, if you are giving them an order, if you are telling them what to do, instead of collaborating with them and helping them to find their own reason for doing it, you are not going to be successful. He has so many studies that back this up. So basically what it comes down to is really connecting their screen habits to something that is meaningful to them. So if they have expressed that they hate feeling tired all the time, or they feel so overwhelmed and anxious, or things like that, really getting them to identify how it is they want to feel, what they want their life to look like, what the goals are that they have for themselves, and tying their actions around their screen time to that. So if they want to feel more energized, saying, hey, you keep saying that you want to feel more energized. How about we make one small change around your phone use and see if that has an impact, just by plugging it in downstairs at night. So it's not me saying you need to do this is the rule, and whatnot, which I'm not saying that we can't have boundaries like that, but we are going to be more likely to have success with any type of boundary or expectation that we have if we invite them into the conversation and we help them tie it to what they want for themselves instead of what we want for them. Okay, so the third point I want to talk about is something I think we all feel on some level, which is the loss of real face-to-face connection because we have moved to such a phone-based lifestyle. And if you have not yet read the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, I highly recommend it. It's just so powerful and so mind-blowing about all the things that he brings up with the research around the impacts of phone use for our young people. But he talks about a shift from what we used to have when my generation was growing up and before, which is a play-based childhood, to what we have now, which is a phone-based childhood. And it's a very, very big difference that our current generation of young people are experiencing than what people experienced in the past. So teens spend much less time in person, and they have fewer chances to build social confidence and emotional regulation. So oftentimes what happens for our young people is that online just feels easier, but real life is where, they form resilience and they test the waters and they learn how to navigate social situations and how to adjust and how to bounce back, and all of those things that you don't necessarily have to do when you're just simply in an online experience. And so for a lot of our teenagers, even though they are so connected to people online, they still feel really lonely underneath. They're not making real in-depth connections with people where people really get to know them and they really get to know someone else. And so that is one thing that they're really missing out of when they are constantly just on their devices instead of going out and hanging out at the park or going to football games or, just experiencing life, going out and fishing and doing whatever it might be. And Lisa D'Amour talks about this a lot in her book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers, about how real emotional regulation comes from in-person connection. So teens actually need to practice tolerating awkwardness and reading cues and feeling seen in real life experiences. Screens connect us, but they don't help us learn how to regulate and have all of those practical, hands-on experience life skills that we really, really need to thrive. So one way that we can start supporting this at home is just having some no phone zones, so maybe the first 10 minutes after school or family meals or car rides, we just don't have phones out during those times so that we can have actual connection with each other. We can have conversations. We can talk about things. We can talk about how our day went, challenges that are coming up for us or things that we're excited about. And even just that, those conversations and connections with us as their parents is a place to start. And maybe we can even help them plan one small in-person hangout each week with some friends, that we, obviously are not going to facilitate since they're too old for us to get play dates together for them, but we can maybe help them come up with some ideas and help them, do the invite via text or whatever it might be. So we want to also be just modeling that real connection, having eye contact, laughter, shared moments, all of that, right? Instead of just all of us sitting around the living room at night on our phones individually and not even connecting with each other. So the more that we can foster that environment in our homes and encourage them to have those experiences outside of the home with friends, the better. Okay, so next for point number 4, let's talk about motivation, because almost every parent I talk to brings this one up. So what happens when we are getting constant dopamine hits from scrolling is that it dulls our brain's drive for slower, everyday rewards, a good meal or a walk outside or playing catch or whatever it might be. When everything is designed for instant stimulation and we're used to things just coming in rapid fire, just so quickly, all those everyday normal things like just looking out at a beautiful lake, and sitting outside or whatever it might be, just feel a little bit boring sometimes because our systems are just used to being overstimulated. So we actually have to work on recalibrating our systems so that we are not always looking for that instant quick fix and that instant high from our phones. And the cool thing about this is that brains, and especially teenage brains, have something that's called neuroplasticity, which means that, the brain can rewire. It is malleable. It can readapt, even if it's been stuck in these cycles of constantly being on the phone and overstimulated all the time. When we start to take breaks from these devices, it actually starts to recalibrate and, remember that all these everyday pleasures like playing some music or playing a board game are actually pretty fun. But it does take time and consistency. Another psychologist, Richard Boyatzis, he wrote a book called Helping People Change. And he talks about how lasting change really happens through coaching with compassion instead of compliance. And so if I think about that as a parent, what that means is, if I am trying to get my teenagers to do something out of compliance, you do this because I said so, versus compassion, finding their own why, finding their own reason for doing it and getting them on board themselves, how impactful that can be. So really what we're trying to do is help teens picture who they want to become instead of who we're telling them to be. Anytime that it's coming from outside of themselves, any type of change that we're asking them to make, it's not going to last. They might do a few of the actions, they might stick with it at short term, but if it's not coming from any kind of internal drive or any kind of, internal motivating factor, reason for them to actually do it and stick with it, then they won't stick with it. And so that is why, again, it's so important, kind of like with both Jaeger and Boyatzis really talk about, really having that identity piece around it. Who am I and why does this matter to me, right? And then we can actually move towards those types of change. So again, just bringing it back to our own experience, we can say something like, hey, I've noticed when I scroll too much, even things I usually enjoy feel really dull. Do you ever get that feeling too? And that just really opens the door for reflection instead of resistance. We can also just start to invite, quick little dopamine resets. So some outdoor time, creative breaks, phone-free hours, really allowing boredom to return. Boredom is not something, that we should be avoiding. It's really the birthplace of creativity. So the more we can do things like taking our teenagers out into nature and trips and camping and just having kind of organic digital detox where maybe there's not even any cell service, and have some genuine reconnection with, each other, with nature, with themselves. That is so huge. I talked about that a lot in episode 7 of the podcast, where, where I just spoke about how important it is for teens to have that unstructured time outside in the wilderness, camping, doing things where they can just use their bodies and use their creativity and use their natural instincts to maneuver through the world instead of, having that constant pull back to their phone where they can just really reset their whole systems. It's so powerful. It's so fun to watch, actually, when we can actually see them just be completely disconnected and they know their phone is not an option, how their whole energy changes and how, the normal things that they would think are boring all of a sudden become interesting again. All right, and finally, I just want to talk about the mental health impacts of these screens on our young people. So the research that has come out about the mental health impacts is really so alarming. A lot of this information can be found in Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, and he talks about how from 2010 to 2018, anxiety has risen 134%, and depression rose up to 106%. And he also talks about research that looked at girls who were using social media 5+ hours a day and how they were 3 times more likely to experience depression. So we don't actually have to guess about this stuff anymore. We actually have real statistics and data on this, and we're seeing the real effects of social media on teen mental health across the board. So the way this might look at home is we might see more withdrawal, more irritability. We might hear them say things like, I just don't care anymore. They might have lost their spark, lost their joy. And this isn't just being a teenager. So what we want to really do is just respond with compassion and try not to panic. The more grounded we can stay, the better, as we know. So one way that we can talk to our teenagers about this is maybe saying something like, a lot of teens are feeling more anxious with all of this phone use. And I wonder if you've noticed that too for yourself. Do you feel like there is a tie between your anxiety and the amount of time that you spend on your phone? And you could even say something like, hey, you said you want to feel calmer. What if we tried a phone-free night once a week and then see how you feel the next day and see if it does have an impact? And then again, just working on reconnecting, more family time, more friends, more real life, more time outside. All of those things are going to be so helpful. So I know how daunting all of this can feel, and I know how hard it can feel to help support our teens in making these positive changes. But again, just going in with compassion, going in with collaboration, going in with conversations instead of laying down the law, will have a lot more success in these moments. And we want to really work on our own relationship to screen time too, so that we can model what we want to see. It just makes zero sense for us to tell them to stop scrolling while we're simultaneously scrolling. Like, it's not a problem for me, but it's a problem for you. That doesn't make any sense, right? If there's a problem with scrolling for so long, then we need to address this as a family and, actually hold ourselves accountable too, right? And model it for our kids. And, not just expect them to do something that we're not willing to do ourselves. And then we can talk about how is it making us feel? We've all spent, at least an hour less on our phone this week. Does anyone feel better? What have you noticed? Have you been able to participate in more things? Have you noticed feeling a little bit lighter? What are the wins, right? All of those things. The more we talk about it, the more the communication is open. we can just really help the whole process along. So those are the 5 biggest areas I see affecting teen screen time and mental health, which were comparison, sleep, connection, motivation, and mental health. So in this next part, I'll share how to actually turn this insight into a plan, one that builds connection instead of power struggles. All right, so let's go ahead and just make some simple action steps that we can all try together here. So the first one is to co-create a plan with your teen. So wait for a calm moment. Maybe it's dinner or a drive or a walk, and frame the conversation as teamwork or a team meeting, right? Hey, I'd love to come up with some ideas so that we both feel better about our screen time. Ask what they think is realistic. Like, is no phones at the table? Like, how does that sound to you? Can we do that? How would it feel to charge phones outside of our bedrooms? What would it look like to have the first 30 minutes of the morning screen free? So when our teenagers are going to help shape the boundary, they are going to be way more likely to follow through on it, right? Screen time boundaries for teens work best when they're collaborative and not top down. And number 2, model one small change yourself. Choose one doable habit that you want to do, and then you can start modeling it. So for example, plugging your own phone in downstairs at night, or avoiding doom scrolling in the car line, or leaving your phone face down during family time. And just be transparent about it and talk about how it feels. Like if you feel better, if you notice something different from having less screen time. We can even normalize it by saying something like, wow, that was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Or we might say something like, I actually slept better when I didn't scroll before bed. So number 3, we can really work on replacing phone time with something else. So it's not just about restriction, it's that we're actually adding in something else. So instead of less screen time, think about more connection time. So filling that dopamine gap with real world rewards. So maybe it's like Sunday movie night or game night, or cooking dinner together, or something that they might find to be fun and exciting, right? Maybe those weren't the great examples for your particular teen, but maybe something that they would enjoy doing that you guys could do together. So really, building in those moments for connection, because if we're just saying get off your phone, but then they have nothing to do, then that's going to be problematic, because then they're going to start nagging about it and it's going to become more of an issue. So the more we can insert activities that we're doing together and things like that, the more success we'll have with it. And this will really help the brain link satisfaction to presence and connection and all of that as well. So small shifts like this really strengthen teen screen time and mental health without feeling punitive. All right. And then number 4, we can really work on leading with compassion instead of compliance, right? So real change sticks, again, when people connect habits to who they want to become. So instead of you need to put your phone away, try you've said you want to feel more relaxed before bed. What might help with that? And we can just ask more reflective questions. What kind of person do you want to be when it comes to tech? What are your values around phone time and media use and all of that? And then finally, every few weeks, just check back in about it. So really checking in with them about what's working, what's not working, what's one small thing we could tweak. And all of that just really keeps it collaborative and low pressure. And remember, reminding everyone that this is not about perfection. This is just about, a little bit of progress, like moving in the right direction. Because healthy tech habits are learned, they are not imposed. They're practiced and turned into habits over time, and they don't just change overnight, right? These are things that we constantly need to be, reinforcing through our own relationship with tech, as well as the conversations that we're having, as well as the connection time we're creating and all of that as well. All right, so let's take a minute to recap what we covered today, because this is a lot, but it all does tie together. So first of all, we started by talking about teenagers' brains and how they are wired for novelty and social approval and reward, and how dopamine and variable rewards make social media addictive by design. And teenagers' control systems are still developing, so it's not a lack of willpower. It's just that the system is designed to pull them in, and all of us. And then we also talked about how the loss of sleep and overstimulation amplify everything. All of the mental health issues, the fatigue, the moodiness, the irritability, all of that is impacted so much by losing sleep because they're scrolling on their phones. So one big takeaway is just that teen screen time and mental health challenges are not about weakness. This is something that we're all going through and that we're all so addicted because of the way that these things are designed, right? So remember that so much is about connection over control, right? The more we connect with our teens, collaborate with our teens, invite them into the conversation, help them to figure out their own why and to identify the impacts that they are feeling from their phones, the more success we'll have, right? And more when I talk to teenagers, they recognize how much these phones are negatively impacting them. And many of them really, really do want a better relationship with their phones. They want to be engaging in their lives and not just be stuck on their phones all the time. So this is something that they actually do care about. Many of them do. And so the more we can give them tools and have these conversations with them, the better it will be. And when we approach this with curiosity and empathy and collaboration, when we help teens understand why this matters, not just what to do, we give them ownership of their own well-being. All right, and finally, if you'd like a little bit of help with this, I did create a screen time plan and contract that really walks you through having a collaborative conversation to create boundaries around screen time use. So this isn't you saying, here are the rules, sign this contract, I need you to stick to this. It's about you guys really talking about what are our boundaries around screen time. Why do we have these? What are the ones that I'm going to commit to? What are the ones you're going to commit to? How can we hold each other accountable here? And all of that. So it really invites a conversation. And if you'd like to grab that, you can just hop into the show notes and I'll put a link for that screen time plan and contract in there. All right. If this episode helped you at all, please do subscribe to the show, share it with a friend who this might help, and leave a quick review. All of that helps so much and I appreciate it so much. So thank you very much for being here with me and I hope you have just a beautiful rest of your day. All right. Bye everyone. Thanks for listening.